Stay tuned for Press TV's news review, where we go deeper into some of the top stories of the day. On this news review, the U.S. president has once again threatened Venezuela, saying that he's considering all options against the government of President Nicolas Maduro.
All options are on the table. Every option's on the table with respect to Venezuela.
And you would like to see Brazil involved on this, any sort of military option?
We haven't even discussed it. We're going to discuss it today.
Trump was speaking at a White House meeting with his Brazilian counterpart, Jair Bolsonaro, who's backed Washington's campaign against Maduro. The meeting drew a harsh response from Caracas. The Venezuelan Foreign Ministry accused the two presidents of forming, quote, a neo-fascist alliance against the Latin American country. The ministry said such an alliance will fail to spread hatred and war strategies. Trump has said he could use military force to topple the Venezuelan government. Russia, however, has warned against such intervention and defended Maduro as Venezuela's only legitimate leader.
On Tuesday, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov met with U.S. Special Envoy for Venezuela Elliot Abrams in the Italian capital, Rome, to discuss what the media described as a deteriorating situation in the Latin American country. During the meeting, the Russian official warned Washington against military intervention and other forms of illegal influence on the authorities in Caracas. He also reiterated President Nicolas Maduro is Venezuela's only legitimate leader.
Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido declared himself interim president on January 23, and in the following weeks he was recognized by the United States and most European Union and Latin American countries. Italy was the only member state in the EU to veto the recognition of Guaido after he defied incumbent President Nicolas Maduro.
Since the very beginning, we tried to calm down the situation and bring it to a political solution. And since Guaido doesn't control any institution in Venezuela, it makes no sense to recognize him and bring the country to a civil war.
In an official note released later on Tuesday, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said Moscow is ready for specialized contacts on Venezuela with Washington, even though the seriousness of the situation in the Latin American country leaves no room for error. Some analysts call the Rome meeting between Moscow and Washington an important step which could prevent the crisis in Venezuela from turning into an armed conflict.
One thing is rhetoric, the other is hard facts. Of course the US can make an intervention, but at what cost? What political cost? What monetary cost? We have had another shutdown very recently. What costs in terms of casualties? And why Venezuela is not a priority for Trump's foreign policy. It's much bigger things in the Asia-Pacific domain.
Venezuela has been asphyxiated by economic sanctions which have severely affected its oil industry and the lives of millions of ordinary people. Max Civilli, Press TV, Rome.
Well, joining us on this edition of Press TV's News Review, we've got author and commentator John Stepling joining us from Norway, and also political commentator and analyst Jason Unruhe joining us from Ontario. Let's start with Mr. Stepling in Norway. I'd like you to open up the meeting that President Donald Trump had with his Brazilian counterpart, and also where do you think he's going with these threats against Venezuela?
The meeting with Bolsonaro makes perfect sense. I mean, they're ideological soulmates, I suppose. And Trump will be counting on Brazilian assistance. Brazil shares a border with Venezuela, and Bolsonaro's an open fascist, a Nazi sympathizer. But you know, the U.S. has a history of kind of botching these coups. This didn't go according to plan, and contrary to what the press was just saying, most countries in South America did not recognize Guaido. Most countries in the world did not recognize this you know, master who's never held office, never been the head of anything other than the darling of John Bolton, apparently. The U.S., for the entirety of Maduro's presidency, has been attacking Venezuela one way or another. In 2015, Obama declared that Caracas was a national security threat, and doubled down on sanctions. I mean, people criticize Maduro a great deal, even from the left, say he's made mistakes and so forth. Everything he's done has been a reaction to provocation from the fascist opposition, the U.S.-funded fascist opposition. And I can't see that he's frankly made any mistakes. I mean, he's had a very difficult presidency because he's under constant assault. And one other note, the blackout, the attack on the power grid and the hydroelectric plant and so forth, this was openly designed by a spin-off from OTPAR, a group that was active in anti-Milosevic stuff back in 1999, a Belgrade-based kind of neo-fascist group. And they make no secret about this, and they're funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. This is the kind of thing that has gone on for 18 years. I mean, it's nothing new. It's not unique to Trump. It's just intensified recently, but they sort of made a hash of it, and I don't really believe they want to send in troops. I mean, there must be people in this administration, although God knows this may be not true at all, but there must be people that will tell Trump this is a bloodbath waiting to happen. There will be a cause of just massive carnage if you try to militarily intervene. And it is probably what Moscow is saying as well.
Mr. Unruhe, your thoughts on the issue. Mr. Steppling says that if the United States decides to act militarily against Venezuela, it's a bloodbath waiting to happen. And also the Venezuelan Foreign Ministry has stated that the United States is trying to form an alliance against the Latin American country. Do you see it in that light as well?
Oh, most definitely, I do see it that way. Any attempt to overthrow militarily through an invasion would certainly end up costing an astronomical amount of lives in the country, which would be wholly to the detriment of essentially human rights. I think it's very clear that the U.S. is building a coalition. The most obvious players are Bolsonaro, obviously, in Brazil, and also Colombia as well. We saw the document, which I assumed was a little propaganda act by Bolton to question the idea of placing 5,000 troops inside of Colombia. This is a rather complicated situation. Venezuela does owe a fair amount of money to both Russia and China, loans that they've taken to continue to function. And should they fall to U.S. power, should they fall to a U.S. invasion, those debts will most likely not be repaid. But despite that, it is very clear that Nicolas Maduro is the rightful leader of Venezuela. He has done what he thought was best for his people, and I would agree with him on about 99% of everything he's done. By no means is he perfect. One example would be dealing with multiple exchange rates would be a mistake that he made. But in the greater context, Maduro has been the best thing for Venezuela. And I don't think that there's any really questioning that. I think that the United States has made it very clear that this is about oil. John Bolton recently went on Fox News and literally said that it was about oil. Just the other day, we had a retired Brigadier General, Anthony Tata, go on Fox News and not only mention the oil, but even refer to it in the possessive as though the United States was entitled to it. And the fact that he could say this so publicly with everyone to hear without any kind of censorship or self-restraint, it seems like there's a tremendous lack of self-awareness that this hostility against Venezuela has been very much very open to be about the oil, to be about the resources and the wealth of the country. It seems that this administration doesn't seem to want to hide that very well. They can make all kinds of lofty claims about humanitarian intervention, yet they feel no need to have this kind of concern for Puerto Rico, which is right up the coast of the United States, which is still suffering from a terrible crisis that began 11 months ago. So I think that Russia certainly does understand that they need Venezuela as an ally, and it's very important that they do back them up on this. It's just that Russia is on, to say, the right side of history, and that Maduro is the rightful leader of the country and should be afforded all that kind of respect. I think this rhetoric about the all options being on the table comes as even CNN and even more conservative media is no longer referring to Guaido as the legitimate president. Even now, they're starting to refer to him as the alleged president and other such descriptive words.
Right.
We recently saw them being the White House getting upset about that kind of reference.
From Ontario, political commentator and analyst Jason Unruhe and author and commentator John Stepling joining us from Norway. Gentlemen, thank you for contributing to this segment of the program. That's it with Press TV's News Review. Stay tuned. More news up next.